"You don't belong in this house anymore," my sister said, smiling across the courtroom. "The judge is about to make that official." I whispered, "Mom would never have wanted this." She laughed. Then the judge reached toward one forgotten document, and the room suddenly fell silent. "I'm Emily Dawson and I'm 35 years old. I work as a physical therapist, helping elderly patients learn how to walk again after surgeries, strokes and painful accidents. Every day I remind people that healing takes patience. I just never imagined I'd need that same lesson inside my own family. For 4 years while my mother battled heart failure, I worked full-time, drove her to appointments, cooked her meals, managed her medications and paid whatever bills she couldn't afford. My older sister, Vanessa, visited when it was convenient, usually arriving with flowers just before relatives stopped by so everyone would praise her for caring. I stayed quiet because Mom always told me peace was worth protecting. After she passed away, all I wanted was to respect her wishes and keep the small family home she loved. It wasn't a mansion. It was a modest house worth around $280,000, filled with memories instead of luxury. I wasn't rich or glamorous, but I had something they didn't expect. If you've ever spent years caring for someone only to feel invisible afterward, I hope you'll stay with me. If your own family underestimated you, you're not alone. Please subscribe if stories like mine speak to you. Tell me in the comments if someone has ever taken credit for your sacrifices. And if you believe truth deserves a chance, don't forget to like this story or click hype before we keep going. The weeks after Mom's funeral felt strangely quiet. The house still smelled like her lavender hand lotion mixed with old books and fresh coffee that seemed to linger in the kitchen walls. I couldn't bring myself to change anything. Her favorite chair remained beside the window. Her reading glasses were still resting on the small wooden table where she'd left them. I thought the legal process would be simple. Mom had always said she believed in fairness. She often reminded both of us, "You'll have each other after I'm gone. Don't let money change that." I believed her. The first probate meeting started calmly enough. Vanessa wore a sharp navy suit and greeted everyone with warm smiles. A few cousins hugged her. My aunt squeezed her hand and whispered, "Your mother would be proud of how strong you've been." Nobody said anything to me. The attorney opened several folders and began reviewing paperwork. I listened carefully, expecting routine questions. Instead, Vanessa slid another envelope across the table. "I have something Mom signed before she passed," she said. The room grew quiet. The attorney unfolded several pages. Vanessa looked directly at me. "Mom wanted the entire house left to me," she said calmly. Emily understood that. She just doesn't want to admit it now. I stared at her. "What are you talking about?" I asked. "You know exactly what I'm talking about. I've never seen those papers." He shrugged. "Maybe you weren't paying attention." Several relatives exchanged uneasy glances. My uncle cleared his throat. "Emily," he said softly, "maybe your mother changed her mind near the end." I felt my stomach tighten. "No," I answered. "She would have told me." Vanessa folded her hands. "You were just helping around the house," she said. "That doesn't mean Mom wanted you to own it." The words hurt more than I expected. Helping around the house. I had spent years putting my own life on hold. I missed holidays with friends, turned down promotions that required moving away, and emptied my savings to keep Mom comfortable. Yet somehow, in a few simple sentences, Vanessa had erased all of it. I wanted to believe the truth would speak for itself. Instead, the room slowly turned against me. My aunt sighed. "Emily, maybe it's time to let this go." Another cousin nodded. "Vanessa has paperwork. Fighting this will only divide the family." I looked at every face around that table. People I'd celebrated birthdays with. People I'd helped move into new homes. People who smiled at me every Christmas. Not one of them asked me if I believed the papers were real. The hearing ended without a final decision, but it was clear which way everyone thought it would go. As we walked into the courthouse hallway, Vanessa caught up with me. She smiled as though we were sharing a private joke. "You were just Mom's helper," she said quietly. "You were never the one she trusted with the house." I stared at her. "Don't rewrite our mother's life." She laughed. "I'm not rewriting anything. I'm just finishing the story." A few people standing nearby heard her. One woman looked at me with sympathy. Another simply looked away. I stood there holding back tears while my own sister walked toward the parking lot looking completely satisfied. That afternoon I drove home alone. The sound of the windshield wipers filled the silence even though only a light drizzle touched the glass. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my fingers hurt. For the first time since Mom died, I wondered if I was about to lose the only place that still felt like home. The days that followed were even harder. I called relatives who had once promised they would always stand by me. Most never answered. Those who did sounded uncomfortable. "Emily," one cousin said, "you need to stop fighting Vanessa." "I'm not fighting her," I replied. "I'm asking people to look at the truth. The truth is that you're making this harder than it needs to be." Another aunt was even harsher. "Your mother is gone. Stop tearing the family apart over a house." I lowered the phone. "They're tearing us apart," I whispered to myself. Nobody wanted to hear it. Within a week, invitations stopped coming. Family dinners happened without me. Photos appeared online showing everyone smiling together. Vanessa stood in the middle of every picture. I wasn't even mentioned. Then came the second betrayal. I drove to Mom's house to water the flowers she had planted along the front porch. My key wouldn't fit. I tried again. Nothing. A moving company truck was parked across the street. I walked around the side of the house. Every lock had been changed. My heart dropped. On the porch sat 6 cardboard boxes. My winter coats. Old family photo albums. Books I'd owned since college. Even the blanket Mom had sewn for me when I was 12. Everything had been packed like unwanted storage. Mrs. Collins, our elderly neighbor, stepped outside. "Emily," she called carefully, "I didn't know if you wanted me to say anything." "When did this happen?" "Yesterday afternoon." "Did Vanessa do this?" She hesitated. She said the house already belonged to her. I looked at the boxes. One family photograph had slipped halfway out. It showed Mom standing between both of us years earlier. She was smiling. Neither of us deserved that smile anymore. I loaded the boxes into my car one at a time while curious neighbors watched from their windows. Nobody said a word. The silence hurt almost as much as the betrayal. A few days later, the third blow arrived. One of my patients asked me something that stopped me cold. "Emily," she said gently, "I heard you've been having trouble with your family." I smiled politely. "Families can be complicated." She looked uncomfortable. "Someone told people you barely visited your mother near the end." I froze. "What?" "They said you only came back because you wanted the house." For a moment I couldn't breathe. The rumors had spread beyond my family. Vanessa hadn't just tried to win the house. She was trying to erase every sacrifice I had ever made. That night I sat alone at my apartment kitchen table. I could have posted angry messages online. I could have called every relative and screamed until someone listened. That I stayed quiet. Anger would only make me look guilty. Facts would do something much stronger. So I opened the first filing cabinet I'd brought from Mom's house. Every folder was exactly where I'd placed it years earlier. Medical records. Insurance forms. Utility bills. Tax papers. Appointment calendars. As I carefully sorted through them, one thought stayed in my mind. If Vanessa was lying, then somewhere the truth still existed. I just had to find it. For the next several evenings, I turned my dining table into a small archive. Every folder had a label in Mom's careful handwriting. Every envelope carried dates, notes, or reminders. I remembered organizing these papers while she rested in the living room. She always smiled and said, "You'll know where everything is when I can't remember." Back then, I thought she was only trying to stay organized. Now those words carried a different meaning. What they didn't know was that I'd kept every document Mom ever asked me to organize. I never threw away important papers. Every signed form had a copy. Every notarized page went into a separate binder. Medical records stayed in blue folders. Financial documents stayed in green ones. Property records had their own locked file box. I worked slowly because I refused to miss anything. The quiet inside my apartment was broken only by the ticking wall clock and the soft sound of paper sliding across the table. Then I found something strange. One property folder contained a handwritten note. "Keep with original instruction." I frowned. I didn't remember seeing those words before. Inside was another sealed envelope. The paper felt older than the rest. When I carefully opened it, I found a signed statement with a notary seal and my mother's signature. It explained exactly how she wanted the house handled if anything happened to her. My heart started racing. The wording was completely different from the papers Vanessa had shown the court. This wasn't just another copy. It was the original property instruction my mother had signed years earlier. I leaned back in my chair. "So this is what you hoped nobody would ever find," I whispered. The next morning I made one phone call. There was only one person I trusted enough to ask for help. His name was Richard Hale. He had been my parents' attorney long before I was born. After retiring from full-time practice, he only accepted a few special cases each year. More importantly, he had known my mother for over 30 years. When I explained what I'd found, he didn't interrupt. Finally he said, "Emily, bring every document you have. Don't leave anything at home." That afternoon I walked into his office carrying 2 heavy storage boxes. He spent nearly 3 hours reading every page. Sometimes he nodded. Sometimes he frowned. Finally he removed his glasses. "These dates don't match." I looked at him. "What does that mean?" "It means someone appears to have presented paperwork that ignores this signed instruction." He carefully placed the original document inside a protective folder. "This changes everything." For the first time in weeks I felt hope. Richard never promised victory. Instead he promised preparation. "We're not going to argue with emotions," he said calmly. "We're going to let verified facts speak." Over the following days we reviewed every signature, every date, every witness, and every notarized record. Nothing was left to chance. Meanwhile, Vanessa acted as though the case was already over. She called relatives to celebrate before the next hearing had even happened. One cousin accidentally told me, "Vanessa says she's already picking new paint colors." Another laughed and said, "She can't wait to remodel the kitchen." They were planning renovations before the judge had made a final decision. Someone even joked about turning Mom's sewing room into a home gym. Hearing that stung more than I expected. That room still held Mom's sewing machine, her reading lamp, her favorite quilt folded across the chair. To everyone else, it had become empty space waiting for a makeover. To me, it was part of her life. Richard noticed my expression during one meeting. "Stay focused," he said. "I am." "No. You're thinking like a daughter. In court, we need to think like people presenting evidence." He was right. From that day forward, I stopped wondering whether people believed me. Belief wasn't enough anymore. Proof was. The night before the final hearing, I barely slept. Not because I feared losing. Because I finally understood something. The truth had been sitting quietly inside a forgotten envelope all along. Vanessa had built her confidence on the assumption that nobody would ever discover it. Tomorrow she was going to learn exactly how dangerous a single honest document could become. The courtroom felt even quieter than it had during the first hearing. I could hear chairs moving across the floor and the steady tapping of a clerk's keyboard. Every sound seemed sharper than usual. Vanessa walked in wearing another expensive suit. She smiled at relatives sitting behind her. When she noticed me, she shook her head. "You still haven't accepted reality?" she asked. "I came for the truth," I answered. She laughed. "You came to waste everyone's time." Richard stood beside me without saying a word. When the hearing began, Vanessa's attorney confidently repeated that the house belonged entirely to her. He claimed the documents already submitted proved our mother's intentions beyond question. Vanessa looked toward me with quiet satisfaction. He thought it was over. Richard waited patiently until it was our turn. "Your Honor," he said, "before closing this matter, I'd like the court to review additional evidence that has not previously been considered." He handed several folders to the clerk. Vanessa frowned for the first time. Her attorney quickly flipped through the papers. "What are these?" he asked. "Original property records," Richard replied. The judge carefully examined each page. Minutes passed. Nobody spoke. Finally the judge looked up. "Counsel," he said to Vanessa's attorney, "is there a signed property instruction document connected to these earlier filings?" The courtroom became perfectly still. Vanessa looked toward her attorney. He hesitated. "I'm not aware of one." Richard calmly stood again. "There is, Your Honor." He opened a protective folder and removed the original document I had discovered inside my mother's files. This instruction was signed by the deceased, properly witnessed, and notarized years before her passing. It remained with the original property records exactly as she directed. The judge accepted the document. He compared signatures. He checked dates. Then he reviewed the paperwork Vanessa had previously submitted. His expression slowly changed. He looked directly at Vanessa. Can you explain why this signed instruction was omitted from the documents presented to this court? Vanessa swallowed. I don't know anything about that document. The judge continued reading. It specifically states that ownership of the property is to be shared according to the provisions outlined here and that no later unsigned summary may replace these instructions without proper legal execution. Vanessa's attorney looked stunned. He quietly whispered something to her. She didn't answer. The judge compared another page. Several later filings appear inconsistent with this original instruction. Nobody moved. My uncle lowered his head. My aunt stared at the floor. One cousin slowly covered his face with his hands. For weeks they had treated me like a greedy liar. Now they couldn't even look at me. The judge closed the folder. This court recognizes the original signed property instruction as authentic. He paused before continuing. The claim for sole ownership is denied. The words echoed through the room. Just like that, everything changed. Vanessa's shoulders dropped. The confidence she had carried for months disappeared in seconds. Her attorney quietly asked for a brief recess. The judge refused. This matter has been sufficiently clarified. He also ordered additional review of how incomplete documents had been submitted during the probate process. Vanessa didn't say another word. As people began leaving the courtroom, several relatives approached me. My aunt spoke first. Emily, we should have listened. I nodded politely. You should have. My cousin looked embarrassed. I'm sorry. I hope you mean that. He couldn't meet my eyes. Vanessa remained seated. For a moment I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Then I remembered the locked doors. The cardboard boxes. The lies told to neighbors. The rumors that questioned my love for our mother. Some wounds don't disappear because someone finally gets caught. Outside the courthouse, Richard smiled. Your mother trusted the right person. I looked at the folder in my hands. No, I said quietly. She trusted the truth. A few weeks later, the legal process officially ended. The court restored my rights exactly as my mother intended. Questions about the altered paperwork continued through the proper legal channels, and Vanessa faced the consequences of her actions. More painful than any legal problem was what she had lost. Very few relatives trusted her anymore. The same people who once applauded her victories now kept their distance. As for me, I returned to the little house that had meant so much to my mother. I left her sewing room exactly as she loved it. I planted fresh flowers beside the front porch. When I walked through the front door, I no longer felt like someone fighting to stay. I felt like someone finally coming home. People sometimes ask if I hate my sister. I don't. Hate would keep me tied to the worst chapter of my life. Instead, I chose peace. The house became more than property. It became proof that honesty still matters, even when lies seem louder. The strongest truth isn't the loudest voice. It's the one that survives every lie. If someone in your own family ever tried to take away something that rightfully belonged to you, then you understand how deeply that betrayal can hurt. I'd truly like to hear your story. Share it in the comments because someone else may find strength in your experience. Subscribe if you believe honesty is always worth fighting for. Click hype to help this story reach others who need it. Standing up for yourself is never easy, especially when the people hurting you are family. If you've lived through something similar, subscribe and become part of this community. Let me know this story meant something to you by clicking hype. And tell me where you're watching from because I love seeing how far these stories reach. Thank you for spending your time with me, and I'll see you in the next story.